The morning sun filtered through the gauze curtains of our Denver suburb home, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floors that David and I had chosen together 8 years ago. I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked. The carefully arranged throw pillows on our beige sectional, the wedding photos still displayed on the mantel, the coffee maker humming its familiar tune. It was the kind of quiet Saturday morning that had once felt like a blessing, but lately had begun to feel more like a holding pattern. David emerged from his home office, laptop bag slung over his shoulder despite it being the weekend. His salt and pepper. Hair was perfectly styled, his button-down shirt crisp even at 9 a.m. At 43, he maintained the same meticulous appearance that had first attracted me when we met at a financial planning seminar in downtown Denver. I was 28 then, working as a marketing coordinator for a small nonprofit, and he seemed so established, so secure. "Julia, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying that measured tone he used in his business calls. He set his laptop bag on the kitchen island and turned to face me, hands clasped behind his back in a posture I'd grown to recognize as his serious stance. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been scrolling through job listings. Again. Since being laid off from my position at the environmental advocacy group 6 months earlier, my days had fallen into a routine of applications, interviews, and polite rejection emails. The nonprofit sector in Denver was competitive, and at 36, I sometimes felt I was competing against candidates with half my age and twice my energy. "What's on your mind?" I asked, though something in his demeanor made my stomach tighten. David was many things: controlling, distant, increasingly absent, but he was rarely dramatic. When he said we needed to talk, it usually meant another lecture about household expenses or my job search timeline. He pulled out one of the bar stools and sat across from me, the marble countertop between us suddenly feeling like a negotiation table. "I've been thinking about our marriage, about where we are and where we're heading." He paused, studying my face as if gauging my reaction. "I think it's time we consider divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I stared at him, waiting for the emotional impact to hit, but instead felt an odd sense of relief mixed with disbelief. "Divorce," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. "Now, before you get upset, hear me out," David continued, raising his hand in a gesture that reminded me of his client presentations. "This doesn't have to be messy or contentious. We can handle this like adults, quietly and efficiently. I've already spoken to an attorney." "You've already spoken to an attorney?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Just preliminarily," he said quickly. "Look, Julia, we both know this hasn't been working for a while. We barely talk anymore. We want different things. And honestly, I think we'd both be happier apart." I closed my laptop and really looked at my husband for the first time in months. His blue eyes, once warm and inviting, seemed distant and calculating. There was something else there, too. Something that looked almost like relief, as if he'd been carrying a secret he was finally ready to unburden. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, surprised by my own calm tone. David's shoulders relaxed, slightly. "An uncontested divorce. Clean, simple, no finger-pointing or blame. We divide our assets fairly. The house, the cars, the retirement accounts. You get to keep your independence, I get mine, and we both move on with our lives." "And you've thought this all through?" "I have," he said, reaching into his laptop bag and pulling out a manila folder. "I've drafted a basic asset division. The house is worth about $400,000. We have about $30,000 in shared checking and savings, plus our individual retirement accounts." He slid the folder across to me. "I think this is fair to both of us." I opened the folder and scanned the handwritten notes. His penmanship was as precise as everything else about him. According to his calculations, we'd split the house proceeds, divide the shared accounts, and each keep our own retirement savings. On paper, it looked reasonable. Almost too reasonable. "What about spousal support?" I asked. I don't think that's necessary, David said quickly. You're educated, capable, and you'll find another position soon. We've only been married 8 years, and you were working when we met. I think a clean break is best for everyone. I studied his face, looking for signs of the man I'd married. David had always been pragmatic, but this level of detachment was new. It was as if he was discussing the sale of a business asset rather than the dissolution of our marriage. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course, he replied, standing up. But Julia, I really hope we can handle this maturely. Divorce doesn't have to be a war. It can just be a mutual recognition that we're not right for each other anymore. As he gathered his things and headed toward the garage, I remained seated at the kitchen island, staring at the folder. Something about his presentation nagged at me. David was thorough to a fault, the kind of man who color-coded his files and balanced his checkbook to the penny. Yet his asset summary felt incomplete, almost rushed. That evening, as David worked late in his office again, I found myself thinking about our financial situation more carefully. During our marriage, David had always handled the majority of our finances. He paid the mortgage, managed our joint savings, and filed our taxes each year. I contributed to our shared expenses and maintained my own small checking account, but I'd gradually let him take the lead on our bigger financial decisions. It wasn't that he'd been secretive exactly, but he'd been managing. Don't worry about it, honey. I've got it handled, was his standard response whenever I asked about our retirement planning or investment strategy. At first, I'd appreciated his financial acumen. He was a certified financial planner, after all, and I trusted his expertise. But now, faced with divorce papers and asset division, I realized how little I actually knew about our complete financial picture. The next morning, David left early for a client meeting in Colorado Springs, mentioning he'd be gone most of the day. After he pulled out of the driveway in his black BMW, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at his desk in the home office. The desk was immaculate, as always. Everything had its place. Pens in their holder, papers neatly filed, not a speck of dust on his dual monitors. I opened the top drawer, not sure what I was looking for, but driven by an instinct I couldn't quite name. Inside, I found the usual collection of office supplies, business cards, and a small address book. Nothing unusual. The second drawer contained client files, all meticulously labeled and organized. The bottom drawer was locked. I stared at the locked drawer for a long moment. In 8 years of marriage, I'd never seen David lock anything in our house. We'd always maintained an open policy about personal spaces, or so I'd thought. After 20 minutes of searching, I found a paperclip and managed to manipulate the lock until it clicked open. Inside were more files, but these were different. They were labeled with account numbers rather than client names, and they were filed in a separate system from his work documents. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the first folder. Bank statements. Lots of them. But not from any bank I recognized as ours. The first statement was from a bank in Denver I'd never heard of, Rocky Mountain Private Banking. The account holder was listed as David Thompson, and the balance made me sit down hard in his leather chair. $237,000. I flipped through the statements, my heart pounding. The account had been active for over 4 years, with regular deposits ranging from $5,000 to $15,000. The most recent statement was dated just 2 weeks ago. I opened the second folder. Another account, this one with an online bank. Balance, $112,000. The third folder contained investment statements from a brokerage firm I'd never heard David mention. Portfolio value, over $180,000. I sat back in the chair, the statements scattered across the desk, and tried to process what I was seeing. According to these documents, David had accumulated over $500,000 in accounts I knew nothing about. My mind raced back to our conversations about money over the years, When I'd suggested we look into buying a larger house, David had said we needed to be conservative with our finances. When I'd wanted to take a vacation to Europe for our 5th anniversary, he'd insisted we couldn't afford it. When I'd lost my job 6 months ago, he'd stressed about our reduced household income and suggested I take the first position offered, regardless of pay or fit, all while sitting on over $500,000 I didn't know existed. I photographed every statement with my phone, my hands shaking with each click. The deposits were consistent, systematic, and large. But where was this money coming from? David's salary as a financial planner was good, but not enough to accumulate this kind of wealth while maintaining our current lifestyle. As I dug deeper into the files, I found records of cash deposits, wire transfers from accounts I didn't recognize, and investment transactions that showed a level of sophisticated financial activity that went far beyond personal wealth management. The front door slammed shut downstairs, and I heard David's voice calling my name. "Julia, I'm back early. The client canceled." I quickly returned the statements to their folders, closed the drawer, and tried to look casual as David appeared in the doorway of his office. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Looking for stamps," I lied smoothly. "I wanted to mail some job applications." His eyes scanned the desk, and for a moment, I thought he might notice something out of place, but his expression softened. "Stamps are in the kitchen drawer, honey. You know that." "Right," I said, standing up. "I forgot." As I walked past him, David caught my arm gently. "Have you thought more about what we discussed yesterday?" I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of the man I'd thought I married. "I'm still processing it all. I hope you'll consider moving forward quickly," he said. "Dragging this out won't help either of us." That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what I'd discovered. David was breathing deeply beside me, apparently sleeping peacefully, while my mind churned with questions and possibilities. The man I'd married wasn't who I thought he was. The financial security I'd believed we lacked was sitting in secret accounts under his name alone. And the quiet, uncontested divorce he was proposing would leave me with a fraction of what I was actually entitled to. The next week passed in a strange dance of normalcy and deception. David went to work each morning, kissed my cheek goodbye, and asked about my job search over dinner. I submitted applications, attended interviews, and updated him on my progress. To anyone watching, we looked like a couple working through the ordinary challenges of marriage and career. But underneath this veneer of routine, I was conducting the most important investigation of my life. I started by visiting our family attorney, Margaret Chen, whom we'd used for our wills in the house purchase. Margaret was a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for thoroughness. Her office in downtown Denver was modest but professional, with law books lining the walls and family photos scattered across her desk. "Julia," she said, warmly as I settled into the chair across from her desk. "It's been too long. How are you and David?" "That's actually why I'm here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "David has asked for a divorce." Margaret's expression shifted to professional concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help?" I explained David's proposal for an uncontested divorce, pulling out the folder he'd given me. Margaret reviewed his asset summary carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This seems fairly straightforward," she said finally. "House, cars, shared accounts, individual retirement funds. Are you comfortable with this division?" "That's what I want to discuss," I said carefully. "I have some concerns about whether this represents our complete financial picture." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "What makes you think there might be additional assets?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind, knowing I needed to be careful about how much I revealed. "David has always been secretive about our finances. He handles everything, and I've realized I don't have a clear picture of our total worth. Before I agree to anything, I want to make sure I'm making an informed decision." "That's very wise," Margaret said. In divorce proceedings, both parties are required to provide full financial disclosure. If you suspect there are undisclosed assets, we can request a comprehensive financial investigation. What would that involve? Subpoenas for bank records, investment accounts, tax returns, business records if applicable. We'd trace all financial activity to ensure complete transparency. She paused. But Julia, once we start down this path, the divorce becomes contested. It won't be the quiet process David is proposing. I thought about the statements hidden in David's desk, the secret accounts containing over $500,000. What are my rights in terms of those assets? Colorado is an equitable distribution state, Margaret explained. Marital assets are divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. If David has been hiding significant assets accumulated during your marriage, you would be entitled to your fair share. I scheduled another appointment for the following week and left Margaret's office feeling more confident, but also more committed to uncovering the truth. That evening, David was working late again, which had become increasingly common over the past few months. I used the opportunity to return to his office and photograph more documents. This time, I was more systematic, creating a complete record of every statement, transaction, and document in his locked drawer. As I worked, patterns began to emerge. The deposits into his secret accounts corresponded with dates when David had claimed to be working on major client projects. The amounts were substantial and regular, suggesting a significant source of income beyond his declared salary. I also found something else: correspondence with a business partner I'd never heard him mention. The letters referenced something called Thompson & Associates Investment Services and discussed profit distributions and client acquisitions. According to these documents, David wasn't just a financial planner working for someone else's firm. He was running his own business. The next day, I drove to the address listed on the business correspondence. It was located in a professional office park in Lakewood, about 20 minutes from our house. The building directory listed Thompson & Associates on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator up and found myself in a small but elegant reception area. A young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about Thompson & Associates," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm considering hiring them for financial planning services." "Wonderful," she said brightly. "Are you interested in personal financial planning or our investment management services?" "Investment management?" "Yes, Mr. Thompson manages portfolios for high net worth clients. We typically work with individuals who have at least $250,000 to invest." She handed me a glossy brochure. "Our minimum fee is $5,000 annually, but most of our clients find the returns well worth the investment." I stared at the brochure, which featured David's photo prominently on the front page. According to the marketing materials, Thompson & Associates specialized in discrete wealth management for discerning clients and boasted an average annual return of 15% over the past 5 years. "How long has Mr. Thompson been running this business?" I asked. "About 4 years now," she replied. "He built quite a reputation working with private clients before launching his own firm." I left the building in a daze. David had been running his own investment firm for 4 years. Our entire conversation about finances during that time had been based on a lie. He wasn't just hiding money, he was hiding an entire business. The next day, I visited the Colorado Department of Revenue and requested copies of our tax returns for the past 5 years. What I found was another layer of deception. David had been filing our taxes jointly, as we'd agreed, but the returns only showed his salary from his previous employer, not the income from Thompson & Associates. By Sunday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier of David's financial deception. Secret bank accounts, hidden business assets, unreported income, and falsified tax returns. The man I'd married wasn't just asking for a quiet divorce. He was attempting to defraud me of my rightful share of our marital assets. Margaret Chen's office felt different when I returned the following Tuesday. The same law books lined the walls. The same family photos sat on her desk, But now I was armed with evidence that would change everything. "Julia," Margaret said as I settled into the familiar chair. "You sounded urgent on the phone. What's developed since we last spoke?" Placed a thick manila envelope on her desk. "I found some additional information about our finances." Margaret opened the envelope and began reviewing the documents I'd compiled. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she examined the bank statements, business records, and tax documents. After nearly 20 minutes of careful review, she looked up at me with a mixture of professional admiration and personal concern. "Julia, this is substantial evidence of financial fraud," she said quietly. "Your husband has been systematically hiding assets and income for years. These accounts alone contain over $500,000 that he didn't disclose in his divorce proposal." "I keep discovering more," I said. "Yesterday I found evidence of real estate investments he's made through his business, properties in Aspen and Vale that are worth hundreds of thousands more." Margaret made notes on her legal pad. "We need to act quickly. If David suspects you're investigating his finances, he might attempt to move or hide additional assets." She paused. "Are you prepared for this to become contentious? Once we file these allegations, there's no going back to his quiet divorce proposal." I thought about the past week, about David kissing my cheek each morning while hiding a fortune, about his expressions of concern for our financial stability while sitting on secret accounts worth more than most people's lifetime savings. "I'm ready," I said. That evening, I sat at our kitchen island where David had first proposed his quiet divorce, waiting for him to come home. The manila folder he'd given me was still there, looking innocent and reasonable. Now I knew it represented less than 10% of our actual marital assets. David arrived home at 7:30, looking tired but pleased with himself. "How was your day, honey?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Any promising job leads?" "Actually, yes," I said. "I had a very productive meeting today." "That's wonderful," he said, opening the refrigerator. "With whom?" "Our attorney." David froze with his hand on a bottle of beer. "Our attorney?" "Margaret Chen. I wanted to discuss your divorce proposal with her." He closed the refrigerator slowly and turned to face me. "And what did she say?" "She said I should make sure I have complete financial disclosure before agreeing to anything." I kept my voice calm and conversational. "She suggested we might need to do some additional research into our assets." Something flickered across David's face. Fear, anger, or maybe just calculation. "Julia, I gave you a complete summary of our finances. There's nothing to research." "I'm sure you're right," I said pleasantly, but Margaret thought it would be prudent to be thorough, just to protect both of us. David set his beer on the counter without opening it. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Nothing dramatic. Just standard financial disclosure. Bank records, investment accounts, business assets if applicable." I watched his face carefully. "Margaret said it's routine in divorce proceedings. Business assets?" David's voice was carefully controlled. "I don't have any business assets." "Of course not," I agreed. "So the disclosure should be simple." We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I saw the moment David realized his quiet divorce was no longer an option. His jaw tightened, and his eyes hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Julia, I think you're overcomplicating this," he said finally. "We agreed to handle this maturely." "We did," I said. Complete honesty. Seems pretty mature to me. The next morning, David left for work earlier than usual, claiming he had client meetings all day. 20 minutes after he left, Margaret called. "The papers have been filed," she said. "David will be served at his office this afternoon. Are you prepared for his reaction?" David came home that evening like a man walking to his execution. His face was pale, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his hands shook slightly as he set his briefcase on the counter. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Margaret said I shouldn't discuss the case with you directly I replied. The case? His voice rose. Julia, what have you done? I filed for divorce, with full financial disclosure as you suggested. David stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him calculating his options. You don't understand what you're doing, he said finally. This will destroy both of us. How will honesty about our finances destroy us? Because... He stopped himself, apparently realizing he was about to admit something he didn't want to. Admit. Because what, David? He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Julia, there are things you don't understand about my business, about the way finances work in my industry. If you force this investigation, it's going to create problems for both of us. What kind of problems? Legal problems, tax problems, the kind of problems that could affect your settlement too. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you saying you've been doing something illegal? No, he said quickly. Not illegal, just complicated. Julia, if you trust me, if you ever trusted me, you'll withdraw these papers and let us handle this quietly. The way we handled our finances quietly for 8 years? David's face went white. What do you know? I know about Thompson and Associates. I know about the bank accounts. I know about the real estate investments. I stood up from the kitchen stool. I know you've been lying to me about everything. For a moment, David looked like he might collapse. Then his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and dangerous. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, he said quietly. And you have no idea what this is going to cost you. The next morning, David was gone before I woke up. His side of the bed was unmade, and his suitcase was missing from the closet. On the kitchen counter, I found a note, written in his precise handwriting. Julia, you've made a terrible mistake. My attorney will be in touch. 6 weeks after filing for divorce, I found myself sitting in courtroom 4B of the Denver County Justice Center, wearing my best Navy suit and clutching a folder that contained 8 years of financial deception. Judge Patricia Hernandez presided over the hearing, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through every attempt at legal maneuvering. Margaret sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her own files organized, with military precision. Across the aisle, David sat with his attorney, Robert Maxwell, a man whose expensive suit and aggressive reputation had apparently cost David significant legal fees. David looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, his usually perfect appearance slightly frayed around the edges. This is a hearing on the motion for temporary orders and discovery, Judge Hernandez announced. Counsel for petitioner. Margaret stood, adjusting her glasses. Your Honor, we're seeking full financial disclosure from respondent David Thompson, temporary spousal support based on his actual income, and an injunction preventing any further movement of marital assets. On what grounds? The judge asked. Systematic financial fraud, Your Honor. Mr. Thompson has hidden over $800,000 in marital assets while presenting false information about the couple's financial status. He's operated a secret business for 4 years, maintained undisclosed bank accounts, and filed joint tax returns that omit significant income. Judge Hernandez turned to David's attorney. Mr. Maxwell? Robert Maxwell stood, his silver hair gleaming, under the courtroom lights. Your Honor, my client categorically denies these allegations. Mrs. Thompson illegally accessed private business documents and is attempting to claim assets that were legitimately earned through Mr. Thompson's professional activities. Let's focus on the financial disclosure first, Judge Hernandez said dryly. Mr. Thompson, please stand. David rose slowly, his hands clasped behind his back in that familiar pose I now recognized as defensive rather than confident. Mr. Thompson, did you provide complete financial disclosure to your wife regarding your assets and income? David's attorney whispered something in his ear before he answered. Your Honor, I provided information about our marital assets as I understood them. That's not what I asked. Judge Hernandez said sharply. "Did you disclose all of your income and assets to your wife?" A long pause. "Some of my business activities were confidential, Your Honor." "Mr. Thompson, do you operate a business called Thompson & Associates Investment Services?" Another whispered consultation with his attorney. "Yes, Your Honor." "How long have you operated this business?" "Approximately 4 years." "And what is the annual revenue of this business?" David's face was pale now. "It varies, Your Honor." Judge Hernandez looked at the documents in front of her. According to the business records submitted by petitioners, counsel, Thompson & Associates reported revenue of $1.2 million last year. Is that accurate? The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. David glanced at his attorney, who nodded grimly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And did you report this income on your joint tax returns with your wife?" "Your Honor," Robert Maxwell interjected, "we object to this line of questioning without proper—" "Overruled," Judge Hernandez snapped. "Mr. Thompson, answer the question." "No, Your Honor." The admission hung in the air like a confession. I felt Margaret's hand briefly touch my arm, a gesture of support and victory. "Mr. Thompson, do you maintain bank accounts that your wife was unaware of?" "Yes, Your Honor." "How many accounts?" David looked like he was going to be sick. 7, Your Honor." "Combined balance?" "Approximately $850,000. Judge Hernandez made notes on her legal pad, her expression growing more severe with each answer. "Mr. Thompson, during your marriage, did you ever tell your wife that you couldn't afford certain expenses or lifestyle choices?" We maintained a conservative household budget, Your Honor." "While maintaining secret accounts with nearly $1 million?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Thompson, in my 23 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such systematic financial deception within a marriage. You have not only hidden substantial assets from your wife, but you have actively manipulated her financial decisions based on false information." Judge Hernandez granted our motions. Full financial disclosure within 14 days, temporary spousal support of $8,000 per month based on David's actual income, an immediate injunction preventing asset movement, and sanctions requiring David to pay my attorney fees. She also referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential tax fraud charges. "Mrs. Thompson," Judge Hernandez addressed me directly, "I want to commend you for your courage in exposing this deception. Many individuals in your situation would have accepted the proposed settlement without investigation. Your diligence has revealed not just hidden assets, but a pattern of financial abuse that this court takes very seriously." 3 weeks later, David's complete financial disclosure arrived at Margaret's office in 5 boxes of documents. The full scope of his deception was staggering. Beyond the accounts I'd discovered, David had invested in commercial real estate, maintained cryptocurrency portfolios, and established trusts that contained additional assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The total value of concealed marital assets exceeded $1.3 million. 2 months after our courtroom confrontation, David agreed to a settlement that awarded me $650,000 in assets, plus continued spousal support of $6,000 per month for 4 years. The agreement also required him to pay my attorney fees, and provided for additional compensation if any undisclosed assets were discovered. On the day I signed the final papers, I thought about the journey that had brought me to Margaret's office. 8 months earlier, I'd been an unemployed woman, married to a man I thought I knew, worrying about our financial future while he sat on over $1 million in secret assets. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in November. As I left the courthouse that day, I received a text message from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you've cost me." I showed the message to Margaret, who immediately forwarded it to the district attorney's office as evidence of potential harassment. But I wasn't frightened by David's anger anymore. I'd learned that quiet didn't mean powerless, and sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who refused to be silently discarded. 6 months later, I started my own consulting firm helping nonprofit organizations with strategic planning and fundraising. My first client was a women's advocacy group that provided legal assistance to individuals going through difficult divorces. Sometimes, late at night in my new house, I thought about the 8 years I'd spent married to a man who had systematically deceived me. I thought about the dreams I'd deferred, the opportunities I'd missed, the financial stress I'd endured while he accumulated a secret fortune. But mostly, I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who had the courage to investigate, the strength to confront the truth, and the determination to fight for what she deserved. David had wanted a quiet divorce, assuming I would accept his version of our financial reality without question. Instead, he learned that some fights are worth having, and some secrets are too expensive to keep. The settlement money gave me financial independence, but the process gave me something more valuable: the knowledge that I could advocate for myself when everything was on the line. In the end, David was right about one thing: the divorce wasn't quiet. But sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that refuse to whisper.